A judge scorned Caroline Levitt over her silver cross right in court, and moments later her bold defiance turned the tables, leaving him speechless and his career in ruins. You won't believe what just unfolded. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the latest updates. The afternoon sun gently illuminated Washington, D.C. Caroline Levitt, at just 27, was the youngest White House press secretary in history, resting in her opulent apartment close to the White House. As she rose, a small silver cross on the collar of her navy blue blazer, a token of her faith from New Hampshire, sparkled. Suddenly, her phone rang, and it was President Trump. There's a religious case at the D.C. local court. A group of Christians is suing because they've been prohibited from praying in public. Go now, observe, report. His urgent tone left her with little time to ponder. The organized state of Caroline's apartment mirrored her disciplined nature. Neatly stacked documents and business attire ready for the day. She selected a more casual outfit for today, a blazer, white shirt, and black pants, but still wore the cross. As Trump's spokesperson, she was accustomed to addressing crises, but this one resonated with her personal beliefs. Caroline hopped into her sleek black SUV and navigated through the busy streets. NPR was broadcasting the news, but she switched it off to concentrate on the surprising assignment ahead. Before diving into the story, she entered the D.C. local court through the glass doors, stepping into a hot and chaotic environment. The murmurs of the crowd sounded like an off-key orchestra, filled with citizens waiting for minor issues, traffic infractions, contract disagreements, intertwined with the clicking of keyboards at the clerk's desk. She noticed the time, 2:53 p.m. Just moments before the hearing she was there to monitor would commence. Caroline opted for a wooden chair in the middle of the room, placing her document bag in her lap and opening her phone to make notes. The silver cross around her neck sparkled in the fluorescent lighting, but she was oblivious to the gazes directed her way. The courtroom was small and the clutter made it feel stifling. A middle-aged man wearing a t-shirt with "I am King" was nearby, distractedly fiddling with his phone. To her right, a young woman adorned with an oversized, shiny necklace whispered quietly to her lawyer. Caroline frowned. It was evident that the dress code seemed rather lax. She concentrated on her task, observing details about the Christian group suing the government for their right to pray in public parks. This was a significant issue that Trump intended to use as a rallying point for conservatives, and she was there to keep a close watch. The wooden door behind the judge's bench swung open, and Judge Charles Herro entered. Age 62, he had a stern presence, with his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses that slid down his nose, and a black robe that appeared freshly pressed. The crowd instantly quieted as he took a seat, his cold, piercing eyes scanning the room. "All rise," commanded James Wilson, a tall bailiff with a serious expression. Caroline stood with everyone else, her phone still in hand, studying Herro intently. He struck his gavel to begin the proceedings. "This is a court of law, not a place for personal displays," he proclaimed, his voice deep and sharp. Herro proceeded to call cases, one after another. A man fined $50 for a parking infraction with no argument. A woman facing late rent problems given a warning. Caroline jotted notes, observing that Herro operated like a machine, efficient yet cold. She glanced at the man in the "I am King" shirt, who was presenting a neighbor dispute while Herro remained indifferent to his attire. The woman with the flashy necklace was also called, but her jewelry went unmentioned. Something felt off. Suddenly, Herro's gaze fell on her. He froze mid-sentence, rifling through his papers, his eyes narrowed behind his glasses as if recognizing her. "Ms. Levitt," he addressed her, his tone icy but with a touch of hesitation, acknowledging a familiar face from White House press briefings. Caroline met his gaze, unfazed and poised. The crowd began to murmur as others recognized her too. "That cross," Herro indicated toward her neck, his voice stern. "It has no place here. Courtrooms are neutral zones, not venues for faith displays." Caroline looked around, noting the absence of any prohibitive signs. She replied, her tone assertive, "I'm Caroline Levitt, White House press secretary, here to observe a case for work. This cross is a personal symbol, safeguarded by the First Amendment, not against any regulations." Herro's expression reddened. "This is not the venue for that, and it's disruptive." The courtroom is neutral, not a church. He banged his gavel again to emphasize his authority. James Wilson, the bailiff, observed quietly nearby, while Mrs. Thompson, the court clerk, paused her typing to glance at Caroline with interest. The man in the t-shirt and the woman with the necklace whispered among themselves, clearly surprised by Herro's focus on Caroline alone. Caroline stood firm, clutching her phone. She quickly realized that Herro was not merely targeting her, but the symbol she wore, a cross, which he appeared to scorn. "Sir, I have the right to wear it under the First Amendment," she asserted, her voice steady. Herro interrupted her. "Don't lecture me on the law. Approach the bench now." The crowd tensed as Caroline took a composed breath, walking to the defendant's stand with her heels clicking softly on the wooden floor. The room grew silent, all eyes fixed on her as the silver cross on her collar sparkled like a beacon amid brewing tensions. Judge Herro sat elevated, narrowing his gaze, his anger visibly mounting. "What are you doing here with that cross, Miss Levitt?" he asked, his tone low yet biting. "I'm here on duty and have the right to wear it," she responded, still holding her phone and discreetly activating the recording feature. Herro struck his gavel again, the sound echoing ominously. "I've seen people like you believing that faith allows disruption. This is my courtroom, and I say it's prohibited." He leaned forward, clutching the gavel tightly. "Do you comprehend that this behavior is contempt of court?" Caroline furrowed her brow, quickly scanning the room. The man in the I Am King shirt remained unnoticed. The woman with the necklace whispered to her lawyer, ignored as well. Yet her small cross was the issue. "Sir, I am not causing any disruption," she replied, her voice unwavering. "I am here for work, and my attire doesn't affect others. Should there be a specific prohibition, I would like to see the written rule." Herro sneered, his expression chilling. "A rule? I am the rule here. You walked into my courtroom wearing that, showing disrespect for the law, and now you dare request documentation?" He banged the gavel with such force that Mrs. Thompson paused, looking up with concern. The crowd began to murmur. An older man in the back muttered to his neighbor, "That necklace over there is bigger. Why is no one mentioning that?" James Wilson, the bailiff, stood arms crossed, his expression showing a hint of sympathy. He had witnessed Herro manage countless cases, but this one felt uniquely focused on the young woman. The crowd's whispers grew as some discreetly pulled out their phones despite the filming restrictions. Caroline remained steadfast, her phone still in hand, her thoughts racing. This wasn't merely about a fine, it was an opportunity to reveal a larger issue. "Are you finished, sir?" she asked softly but with an edge. Herro frowned, caught by her poised demeanor. "Not yet," he retorted. "You will pay and I will proceed with the session. Sit down." Caroline refused to sit. She inched closer to the bench, resting her hand on its edge, unwaveringly gazing at Herro. "I'll pay, but we're not finished here," she stated, her voice low yet filled with resolve. Herro's smirk faltered slightly as Caroline Levitt stood resolutely at the defendant's stand, the silver cross on her blazer collar gleaming defiantly. Herro had just imposed a $500 fine for contempt of court, his face displaying a flush of triumph, hands still gripping the gavel. The atmosphere in the courtroom became charged, murmurs subsiding. Miss Thompson halted her typing, anxious eyes darting between Caroline and Herro, while James Wilson remained arms crossed, tilting his head expectantly. Herro finally broke the silence. "Did you hear me, Miss Levitt? $500, payable today. Sit down, we have other matters." He banged the gavel, signaling an end, but Caroline did not move. Bracing herself, she placed her hand firmly on the bench, declaring, "Sir, before I sit, I need to clarify some points for the record." Herro, startled by her calmness, frowned further. "The record? You have no right to demand anything here," he snapped, though his voice quivered slightly, betraying anxiety. Caroline smiled subtly, exuding the confidence of someone in control. She retrieved a small shiny card from her bag and displayed it for everyone to see. "I am Caroline Levitt, White House Press Secretary under President Donald Trump. But what you might not know, Judge Herro, is that I have a profound understanding of the law." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The man in the I Am King shirt stared, and the woman with the oversized necklace whispered to her lawyer. Herro's hand faltered, pausing midair above the gavel. "That doesn't change the fact that you broke my rule," he muttered, his voice fading. But Caroline seized the moment and moved closer to the podium, her voice resonating within the room. "Are we talking about your rules or your personal bias? I am here on the president's orders to observe a case regarding a group of Christians fighting for their right to pray publicly. This cross," she indicated toward her neck, "is my religious freedom, backed by the First Amendment. You decreased my value to a fine, but are you aware of what the law states?" Harov's face reddened as he attempted to assert his authority. "I don't require your legal education. This courtroom is mine, and I make the calls." Caroline firmly interrupted him, her tone unwavering. "You are mistaken, sir. This law doesn't solely belong to you. Allow me to draw your attention to the Church of Lukumi Babalu, IV City of Hialeah case from 1993. The Supreme Court ruled that banning religious symbols without justification violates the Constitution. So, do you possess a just cause? Or is it solely due to your personal feelings? The room fell into complete silence, with a few audience members discreetly capturing photos despite rules against it. Harov opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mrs. Thompson held her breath, fingers poised above the keyboard. James Wilson, who had witnessed countless hearings, nodded slightly, surprise in his gaze. He had never seen a defendant reclaim control like this. Caroline didn't relent, her voice echoing confidently. "You fined me $500 for contempt, but I hold evidence that counters this. In this very room, that man," she gestured toward the I Am King t-shirt wearer, "is sporting a shirt that clearly violates the dress code, yet you didn't mention it. And her," she pointed to the flashy necklace woman, "is adorned in jewelry yet remains invisible to your scrutiny. It is only my cross, a Christian emblem, that troubles you. This is not law, this is bias." Harov's demeanor wavered, his complexion changing from red to a pale hue. "You're defaming me," he stuttered, his voice growing weak. Caroline was relentless. "I've recorded every single moment since you summoned me to the stand. Additionally, I have already informed the White House office of this injustice. You wish to impose a fine upon me? Fine, but this will not conclude here." The courtroom buzzed again with voices raised in support. Someone called out, "She's right!" Another clapped, though quickly silenced by James Wilson. Herro's composure faltered as he scrambled for control. "Miss Levitt, I can rescind this fine. There's no necessity for escalation," he gestured weakly, his voice trembling, but Caroline remained resolute. "No, sir," she replied, unwavering. "Withdrawing the fine simply because of who I am only shows you are mistaken. The real issue lies in how this court operates. I demand an examination of the past 6 months of records, fines related to religious symbols, and I suggest mandatory First Amendment training for all court personnel, including yourself." The courtroom erupted in a mix of reactions. The older man in the back stood, applauding loudly, exclaiming, "That's right." A young woman muttered, "Who is she? Incredible." Mrs. Thompson typed furiously, eager to document every word, her eyes sparkling from the significance of the moment. James Wilson, surprised but impressed, noted how special Caroline was from the very beginning. Herro slumped back in his chair, his expression pale, hands trembling around the gavel. He finally saw Caroline not just as a defendant but as a powerful adversary. "Do you see me as just a spokesperson?" she asked softly, her voice carrying authority. "I have worked closely with President Trump through numerous legal challenges, from elections to policy disputes. I taught myself the law to defend him, and now I wield that knowledge to advocate for myself and others. You've just made a substantial mistake, Judge Herro." She placed her White House card on the bench, retreating slightly but maintaining her unwavering gaze on him. Herro could only stare back, rendered speechless. He recognized he had confronted not just a quick-witted individual, but also someone highly knowledgeable in legal matters. The audience erupted with applause again, some cheering her name. Mrs. Thompson, typing rapidly, captured the critical moments, grasping the historical significance swirling around her. James Wilson, moving closer to the bench, shared a knowing look with Caroline, filled with growing respect. Herro remained silent, all pretenses of authority fading before her. Caroline exited the D.C. local court, the late afternoon sunlight reflecting off the silver cross at her collar. The clock showed 3:30 p.m. However, the energy inside the courtroom had just ignited like a firecracker. She paused at the doors to check her phone. The recording had successfully been sent to the White House, alongside a brief message directed to Trump's advisor. Herro fined me for the cross. Handled it. Next steps. This was no longer a matter of personal significance. It could potentially be a pivotal moment for Trump and conservatives. The crowd continued to buzz inside the courtroom. The older man turned to his neighbor, a tremor in his voice, stating, "I've never seen someone take down a judge so quickly." A young woman leaned with her boyfriend, whispering, "She's the White House press secretary. Incredible." Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson quickly transitioned to printing the transcription, her hands shaking in response to the extraordinary events unfolding. James Wilson left the courtroom, phone in hand, excited to relay the news. "You've got to hear this," a young woman just put Herro in his place. News of the incident began to spread rapidly, even before Caroline reached her car. Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. X was lighting up with the trending hashtag #CrossInCourt. She opened the app to see a tweet from a witness at the scene. "Judge fines White House press secretary $500 for wearing a cross." She counters with the law and leaves him speechless. Cross in court. Within just 10 minutes, hundreds of comments flooded in. "Who is she? Incredible. Herrova's finished." A major conservative account quickly tweeted, "This is proof the system discriminates against Christians. Thank you, Caroline Levitt." She smiled, realizing a movement was starting to take shape. By 4 p.m., President Trump joined the conversation, tweeting his support. "Caroline Levitt, my amazing spokesperson, just schooled a liberal judge on religious freedom, legal genius. We won't let them suppress faith." In half an hour, his tweet accumulated over 50,000 retweets. Conservative news outlets eagerly covered the incident with headlines like "White House press secretary clashes with judge over cross and emerges victorious." Caroline received a call from Trump's senior advisor, who excitedly praised her performance and requested she prepare a statement for press amplification. Meanwhile, Herro sat alone in his office, shrouded in dim light as shadows illuminated his concerned expression. His phone rang continuously. Calls from the D.C. Judicial Council, reporters, and even old colleagues, but he silenced it, hands shaking around a lukewarm coffee mug. The encounter with Caroline had not only embarrassed him in front of the crowd, but had also begun to resonate across the city. He muttered to himself, "She's just a young woman. How did this happen?" Deep down, he recognized he had met something far greater than himself that day. Mrs. Thompson, lingering at the courthouse, could no longer remain silent. She called a contact at a local newspaper, speaking in a hushed but assertive tone. "I've been with Herro for 12 years, and he consistently targets religious symbols, especially those of Christians. That girl was correct today. I have notes to substantiate this." She retrieved a small notebook from her drawer, filled with similar cases where individuals had faced harsh penalties for wearing crosses or religious symbols, while those flaunting casual attire or ostentatious jewelry faced no consequences. She understood the risks she was taking, but her silence post-incident was no longer an option. James Wilson also took initiative. He gathered with colleagues in the courthouse break room, recounting the day's events with passion. "I counted at least 20 instances where Herro fined individuals for religious symbols this year, yet he overlooks rude t-shirts." He expressed shared frustrations among his peers. A colleague nodded, "I'll contact the media. We need to get this story out." By 5 p.m. outside the courthouse, a Channel 7 news reporter filmed live. Today, White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt was fined $500 for wearing a cross in court. She pushed back, igniting a wave of excitement on X, Cross in Court. The hashtag quickly gathered traction, surpassing 100,000 mentions as people shared their own experiences with Herro. "He fined me $200 last year over a prayer badge," one person commented. Another shared, "I saw him rebuke a mother for wearing a cross during a divorce hearing." A notable account showcased a short clip taken by an anonymous individual while in court, featuring Caroline raising her White House card, her voice strong and determined. That video went viral, garnering over 1 million views just hours later. Caroline sat in her parked car on a quiet corner, absorbing the influx of news coverage. She called her husband, a laid-back businessman, excitement in her tone. "Honey, I just took down a judge. This is likely to become huge." He chuckled on the other end. "You always get into extraordinary situations. Stay safe." She nodded, hung up. and opened an email from Trump's office advising her to prepare for a press conference later that evening. We're turning this episode into a significant political win. Herro turned on the television, his face illuminated by the screen as it displayed reports of his actions. "Judge under fire for fining press secretary," the headlines blared. He turned it off, overwhelmed. The Judicial Council had reached out directly, demanding an explanation from him by morning. He understood his 30-year career was in jeopardy, entirely because of a 27-year-old and her modest cross. The following morning, the office of the D.C. Judicial Council buzzed with energy. News about Caroline Levitt and Judge Charles Herro had spread across Washington, compelling the council to initiate an urgent investigation. Linda Martinez, a seasoned investigator with 20 years of experience, stood before a long table, presenting numerous case files from Herro's courtroom. Her team had been working diligently since 6 a.m. after receiving an official complaint filed by Caroline the previous night. "We need to report within 48 hours, Linda instructed her team firmly. "Locate everything related to Herro and religious symbols." Meanwhile, Caroline sat in her White House office gearing up for the press conference mandated by Trump. She reviewed the courtroom recordings and sent another email to his advisor. "I have data gathered from X. There are hundreds claiming bias from Herro. We need to push this message strongly." Her phone buzzed frequently with incoming messages from lawyers, reporters, and supporters. One law student wrote, "You inspire me." Caroline reveled in knowing this battle had transcended beyond just her. It had reached countless people. At the courthouse, Mrs. Thompson entered the investigation room clutching her small notebook. "I've tracked Herro's decisions over the past 12 years, she shared with Linda, her voice resolute despite her nervousness. "He consistently targets religious symbols, crosses, hijabs, anything that stands out, while flamboyant shirts and loud jewelry get a free pass." Linda sifted through the notebook, spotting numerous instances. September 14, 2024. A man fined $300 for displaying a cross. October 20, 2024. A Muslim woman fined $200 for wearing a hijab. "This is pure gold, thank you," Linda exclaimed. James Wilson arrived, submitting a handwritten statement. "I've worked as a bailiff for 15 years, he noted. Herro's penalties for religious symbols are 3 times harsher than penalties for other offenses. I once witnessed him fine 5 individuals for crosses in a single day, but overlook 3 others wearing offensive t-shirts." Noting quickly, Linda's team began cross-referencing with official records, and soon enough, the data revealed an alarming trend. In the last year, 70% of fines imposed on religious symbols targeted Christians, with penalties averaging $200, a $150 increase compared to other dress code violations. Charles Herro, meanwhile, sat in his home office, preparing to meet with the council via Zoom. "I didn't intend to be biased," he claimed feebly. Linda presented the evidence. "Mr. Herro, the records show that you fine individuals wearing crosses 80% more severely than others. Can you explain that disparity?" Herro fell silent, his eyes lowered, reflecting on Caroline's poised demeanor and her astute legal arguments regarding the First Amendment. "I was unaware," he mumbled. "I assumed I was just maintaining order." By midday, Linda's preliminary investigation report was complete. "This isn't just Herro," she informed the council. "We found 3 other D.C. judges exhibiting similar biases, albeit with less severity. However, Herro offers the most blatant case against religious beliefs, particularly those linked to Christianity." The council decided to suspend Herro pending further investigation. As the news broke, the hashtag #CrossInCourt once again surged in popularity across X. Herro suspended and conservative commentary recognized. Caroline Levitt shakes the system, once again, Trump's legal expertise highlighted. Caroline viewed herself in the mirror of her White House office at 6 p.m., arranging her blazer, the cross still shimmering. Trump entered, placing an encouraging hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Caroline. Tonight we demonstrate that religious freedom is inviolable." She nodded confidently as she approached the podium, where the cameras began to flash rapidly. "Yesterday I was fined for displaying a cross. Not due to wrongdoing, but because a judge presumed he held more power than the law," she stated assertively. "I fought for myself, but more importantly I aim to represent everyone wronged due to their faith." The room was charged with excitement as the audience's questions flew, yet she maintained her calmness while referring to legal statutes and X data. Herro observed the briefing from afar, his hands shaking with anxiety. He quickly switched off the television and retreated into darkness, his phone buzzing incessantly with messages from colleagues, distancing themselves while reporters aggressively sought his attention. What rattled him most was reporting from Thompson and Wilson, people he had trusted. He opened his computer, searching for the Church of Lukumi Babalui case Caroline had cited earlier. "She's right, I was wrong," he sighed. For the first time in 3 decades, Herro felt diminutive. He called the counsel, his voice unsteady. "I am resigning, but I wish to assist in rectifying this." The following day, Herro showed up for a small meeting without his judge's robe. "I failed to recognize my biases," he admitted, eyes filled with regret. "Caroline Levitt helped me see what I had overlooked. I wish to participate in training to prevent such failures from happening again." Linda noted that Herro's change of heart could prove to be constructive. News of the incident spread rapidly and debate erupted. While some ridiculed Herro for feigning repentance, others appreciated his willingness to take the blame, something rarely seen. Back in her office, Caroline received a note from Linda. "You didn't only change Herro, you impacted the entire system. Thank you." She smiled at the framed receipt from her fine as a reminder of the extraordinary ripple effect one day can have. Trump called her at 9 p.m. "Caroline, you're my treasure," he exclaimed. "We're overpowering the opposition." She laughed. "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm ready." After hanging up, she gazed at the cross. A once simple accessory now signifying something monumental for herself and countless others. 3 months later, Caroline Levitt found herself at the White House podium, camera flashes igniting around her. The silver cross gleamed on her navy blazer, a symbol now recognized by millions. Before her stood reporters, TikTok influencers, and representatives from religious communities, all eager to hear her take on religious freedoms. "3 months ago, I simply aimed to do my job," she began, her voice echoing, "but when a judge fined me over my beliefs, I couldn't remain silent. We have altered the system." The audience erupted in applause, some waving cross-in-court signs, while a new plaque stood proudly in the D.C. local court lobby, proclaiming, "Justice honors all faiths." She received a heartfelt letter from a young law student that read, "Miss Levitt, your cross case empowered me. I'm establishing a free clinic for those discriminated against due to their beliefs. Thank you." As Caroline read the letter before her mirror that night, joy filled her heart, knowing she'd inspired the next generation. Charles Herro, now a volunteer instructor, stood before a training class admitting, "I once misjudged. Levitt made me realize justice should be free from bias." Mrs. Thompson and James Wilson continued their commitment to court transparency. Trump called her again. "Caroline, you are my warrior. Keep leading the charge." She nodded, feeling a deeper responsibility as she looked out over D.C. from the White House balcony at sunset. The cross in her hand became a symbol of the flame she had set ablaze, spreading from one courtroom to the entire nation. "Freedom doesn't just happen, it requires fighters," she murmured. A message arrived. The Judicial Council wanted her to lead an extensive reform commission. Ready for the challenge, she embraced the opportunity ahead. One ordinary day had transformed into a catalyst for significant change, demonstrating that an individual's faith and courage can indeed shift the world. The narrative of Judge Herro's fine against Caroline Levitt for wearing a cross, which revealed her legal prowess, encapsulates the ongoing tensions within modern U.S. society, particularly regarding personal liberties and systemic authority. The current environment displays a heightened awareness around issues of religious freedom, judicial impartiality, and the influence of social media. Caroline's experience with Judge Herro reflects a broader trend of public officials imposing their personal views on legal matters, a phenomenon familiar to many Americans who witness regulations around religious symbols in public spaces and educational settings. Her counter-response, anchored firmly in the First Amendment and the Church of Lukumi Babalui ruling, emphasizes that the Constitution can act as a strong defender against injustices. The crossing court surge on X, along with Trump's support, underscores the potential of social media and political authority in amplifying individual voices, a prominent theme in 2025 America. The lessons extend beyond simply opposing injustice. They encompass how to leverage knowledge, community, and technology for social reform. Personally, I see Caroline Levitt stand as a powerful reminder that faith and freedom aren't just words. They're worth fighting for. Her courage turned a small cross into a symbol of resistance against overreach, proving one voice can shake a system. But I get it. Not everyone might agree. Some could argue Herro was just enforcing rules, not targeting beliefs, and that Caroline escalated a minor issue into a spectacle. Was it principle or politics? That's for you to decide. To me, it's inspiring to see someone so young wield knowledge and conviction like that, though it's wild how fast it blew up, right? Thanks for watching this crazy story unfold with me. Drop your thoughts below. Did she overstep, or was she spot on? Like, subscribe, and let's keep the convo going. I can't wait to hear what you think.